I'm Steven.
And I'm Spencer. Welcome to Ragnarokast, your podcast for all things marketing and MarTech.
Hello, everyone. We're the co-CEOs of Ragnarok.
Hi, everybody. I'm Spencer. Welcome to the Ragnarokast.
And the OneSignal podcast. I'm Josh, by the way. I appreciate joining you guys in this forum.
And I'm Lame-o Steven, apparently, just freshly back from paternity leave and ready to take my revenge on people who think I'm lame. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different this week. I'm back, so yeah, we got to do something a little bit more fun. And we're going to be chatting with one of our awesome MarTech partners over at the numero uno signal, OneSignal. And they also have a podcast of their own. So this is almost like a podcast elaboration cast. Yeah,
it is a pod collaboration. I don't know. We'll work on that
a pod elaboration cast. That's a word.
Nice try, man. Nice
terminology for that.
I'm trying. Yeah. I mean, it's MarTech, so you got to throw some fancy word about it, in there just to.
It would be an acronym if we're talking tech,
Oh, fair. Yeah.
Definitely acronym.
Today, since this is a joint collaboration, we're combining the efforts in more of a roundtable discussion about how the world of MarTech has grown exponentially over the years, especially with the tools available to us, how to navigate building tech stacks, and why it's important. Since this is a mixed audience, we need to give you all a little bit of background about ourselves. I'm Spencer. As you already know, I'm a co-founder along with Steven, and we started Ragnarok in 2012. We're actually an agency partner of OneSignal's. Steven, I don't know if you want to add any color to that.
Yeah, so we've been partnering with OneSignal since I think about 2018 or so, and they've been around for quite a while, and we're a big U.S. partner of theirs. And I'll pass it over to Josh.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Steven. OneSignal's large usage in the mobile messaging space. We're now in 1 in every 5 apps, released in the iOS and Android app stores, really focused on customer engagement, and been working with you guys, for several years now. I don't like to limit it just to US. I think we work with you a little bit more than that as well, but we are fairly well scaled across the globe. Only 31% of our customers are here in the United States. So majority of our business is outside. So and it's a great topic. I mean, MarTech, we could spend hours riffing on the ecosystem and the vendors and tools. So I'm excited to at least do it in a truncated format with you guys today. I guess first question I always wanted to know, because we've never talked about this in that first sit down we had years ago in New York when we first met. How did you guys get started in the MarTech space?
So I'm going to take this one simply because Steven's going to be way more eloquent talking about the technical questions that I'm sure are coming up at some point. All right. The year was 2012. Steven and I were roommates, and we've known each other since 1996 or something like that. Been a long time. We're besties from, brothers from other mothers. I don't know how you say that in plural. Fast forward to 2012, we're roommates after college. We're sitting in a basement. The basement happens to be our apartment, the entire apartment, actually. There was no non-basement part of this apartment. We had been, working for a while and just, decided that actually it was a little bit arrogant, but we were like, I think we can do this better than the people that we're working for. And also both of us were like, do we really want to work for other people at this point? So, we knew that we weren't going to be able to go full time right away. So we did have to, grind for about 4 or 5 years, moonlighting, working full time elsewhere. We started the company, 2012, built up our clients over the next 4 or 5 years. We did videos, dance studio, dance rehearsals. We made an app. We made construction company sales materials. We did a little bit of everything. Realized what we want to do and what we don't want to do. Eventually, 2017, we went full time, started hiring people, and we started really getting a lot of interest in not just the content, but the actual ongoing campaign work for email and marketing. I think what really helped take us to the next level was partnering with OneSignal. We've been working with for a few years now, but early on we had a few other companies, and we've sort of been growing from there. And it's actually partnerships is really what's helped us grow to the size that we're at now. And that's kind of why we've gone in the MarTech direction, rather than just being a bread and butter marketing agency like everybody else, every other paid media agency out there. Not trying to throw shade or anything, but there's a bazillion of them. And we've just seen that like there's a need for this specialized niche that we're in. And so we've just trained ourselves in that direction. All right, quick history lesson here. How did we meet the OneSignal team? Well, we were actually on a call with our good friends over at Mixpanel, and they used to have a messaging tool of their own, and they decided to sunset that a few years ago. But they said, don't fret. We want to really be best in breed. We want to focus purely on analytics, which we do really well. And we have a partner that we've been working with that we would love for you guys to meet, and we're introducing our clients to as well. They're called OneSignal. They have a much more robust messaging system than we ever had, and we want, as part of the best in breed ethos, like we want people to work on Mixpanel from an analytics standpoint and OneSignal from a messaging standpoint. I believe it was Yosha on the Mixpanel team and possibly Scott introduced us to the OneSignal team. I think it was like 2 years ago. Actually, it was definitely 2 years ago because I was still living in New Jersey, I think. And I remember being in the car, listening on the call, I think I was driving to the vet or something like that. Yeah, and we got introduced, and it's been a great partnership ever since. But thanks to the Mixpanel team, shout out there for starting off something beautiful.
I get on a little bit of color here. It was, I think we met in person the first time in December of 2020 in some bar in New York City.
Yeah.
And Nick,
we were like the only ones in there.
Well, it was, keep in mind, it was sort of like this pandemic era. Yeah. It was actually our first business trip. It was my first business trip since the pandemic had hit. And I went, I think the following week, I went to Europe for the APS conference. We spoke there and met all these people. And it was kind of coming out of a cave, right? But you guys showed up. And Spencer, you got this wonderful, beautiful beard. You were talking about coming over from New Jersey. Steven's there. And I'm like, what are these guys do? Who are these people? And we had an awesome conversation. You talked about some of the work you've been doing with clients and how you approached it. And I immediately knew that we knew it was a gap for us personally, because being a product-led growth business, it's easy for people to get set up. They can start using the product in 15, 30 minutes, but really getting value out of the product, it really takes some thought and some effort. And ideally, especially for legitimate companies that have resources that don't have the time necessarily to focus on it, they need partnership with someone like yourself. So I remember that week because it was my first trip in 7-8 months. So I think we've been working together for 3-ish years. Something like that. I forget what year it is exactly.
I think I said 2018 earlier. So, that's where my memory's at.
Yeah, with Steven, each time he mentions a date, it gets further and further back in time.
That's right.
Well, I joined the company 5 years ago. And that's 2018. So it was like, I knew it wasn't 2018.
I was going to quote David Bowie's song 5 years, but I realized 5 years is about the end of the world. So I don't want to go there.
So I think it's, obviously it's been wonderful working with you guys. And there's a lot of players out there. One of the things that you do that I think makes the system work really is there are all these great tools, but getting them to work together and properly enabling companies to use them in a manner that's going to drive impact is a critical missing element from most of the SaaS providers, right? We build this great software. We have all these amazing tools and functionality. We riff on how successful a client can be, but if they don't get set up properly, it never works. And I think that's where you guys have really stepped in and had a material impact. So appreciate that.
Oh yeah. It's funny because we were just on a call earlier today, Spencer and I, sort of similar scenario where we're trying to explain to a sales team, one of our partners, of like what it is we do, how do we distinguish ourselves. And what we keep kind of leaning in on is this message of you buy these platforms, but you're not necessarily generating the revenue that was promised when you bought them. So we focus a lot of our effort into making that a reality, whether that's through kind of the hands-on keyboard implementation, integration work, or it's the kind of ongoing consultation about, well, how do you take this really kind of powerful Ferrari that you have, or how do you mix it into the rest of your system and actually expand its footprint or do more with it, either from more of an automation standpoint, save staff time, or from a capability standpoint, like adding in personalization, making that a reality, and seeing what that puts out from a incremental revenue perspective.
Yeah, makes sense. I think you might have just come up with a new tagline too. It's like, I started write down, generate the ROI promise for your MarTech stack or something. And in that, yeah.
Boom.
That's well, I honestly I stole that. I'll give credit where it's due. So Scott Singerman, a dear partner for all three of us over at Mixpanel, constantly quotes that the promise of best in breed is hard to deliver on because it's basically 3 or 4 different vendors for 4 different solutions, and you have to tie them all together. It's very difficult to make that promise of realization. And I realized that we directly solve that problem with a lot of our clients, whether it's through being the sort of visionary or the connector that makes it all work, or the enabler of moving them off of a legacy platform into something best in breed, then actually training their team on how to use it. So they're not sort of trying to figure out how to translate, years and years of legacy platform experience into something that can be done with, 3 button clicks instead of, 7,000 lines of JavaScript or ever how they had to write it before.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting quadrant. I think the overall gist of this is about what is the stack? Should it be? And I don't know if the question is, there's obviously more tools today than there were 10, 15 years ago. And the complexity has increased. But a lot of it's because we're solving greater needs or innovation or, evolution of the industry, so to speak, whether it's new channels or new ways to interact. But I wonder, from your vantage point, because you see all these different vendors and you see all these different use cases and needs, is it really the difficulty of stitching those tools together? Or is it the same quandary that we've always had for 15 or 20 years, which is actually getting them set up with the technology they have and properly implement it so they can actually use it? Does that make sense, the nuance there?
Yes, it does. And I'll take this one, Spencer. I'll give you the next one there. So we'll just ping pong back and forth here, like
Sounds
a paddle. Good. Or you know what? Not even like ping ponging anymore. What's that? What's the new one? Pickleball. We'll pickleball it.
We'll pickleball, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey man, I laid you up. This is all you.
That's right. So I think from my perspective, the challenge is the same. I think it's easy to put yourself into a quagmire thinking that the tool is actually that different. It really isn't that different that it was, 15, 20 years ago. You look at a system like Responses or any of these kind of really, really old legacy players out there. And the main challenge that people always have is in not being very definitive into what they want that tool to do, and then matching that with what can that tool actually do. And that's really where the problem spirals out of, whether that's because of an insufficient data integration, insufficient schema for what that data should look like, misunderstanding of how the tool would actually calculate the data or leverage the data, and then anything that's around the application of that. So does it need to be in real time? Is it syncing in real time? So really, it's kind of a mismatch between what I wanted and what I'm getting. And I think a lot of that comes out of both a lack of good due diligence from buyers of software platforms, which has allowed some kind of bad players to get away with a lot of these sort of insufficiencies that they have in their tools. But it's also been the reason that we see tools like OneSignal kind of come into play, which are much more of that kind of new modern, much more focused on an API, much more focused on a flexibility or being more of a flexible tool as opposed to a, kind of a, here's a SQL table structure that you have to fit into. And here's like all the different points that you connect into. I think you've sort of streamlined that quite a bit by having a simplistic API around that. I think the other piece of that too, which as you mentioned is the tool basically getting better? And they are getting better for sure. They're getting much more competent in terms of how to integrate with them. They're getting more competent in the sales cycle and helping to qualify buyers a lot better. And I think that, that sort of shows in the evolution of the space. And now you have like 20 or 30,000 or 50 or 80 or however many tens of thousands of providers that we have that sort of overlap with one another. There's a lot more room to grow for sure, because we still see it happening today. There's a lot of opportunity still, which is what we're excited about, and I think why we'll continue to exist long into the future.
What I think is compelling, quite frankly, and what people want to know is what directions, not necessarily pick this solution or pick this, partner, but it's more about like, what are the essential tools, why it's important, I think, to think about, your use case and quite frankly, selecting a really good product, and demystifying out there. I think you still have legacy vendors. Let's call them the legacy marketing clouds, where they're like, oh, just buy me and buy everything and you'll be fine. And I think everyone on this call knows that, so let's just call it Salesforce for what it is. Like all their bot, attached products are garbage. They don't even work together. They've not done the effort technically to integrate them. And it just doesn't make, that's why companies like Berets and to a lesser extent, folks like us are having success, because no one can properly implement the marketing cloud stuff to actually send competent messages to users, even with email, which is what they bought these platforms for, let alone modern stuff like SMS or push. And then analytics, right? Like that's not very good within the legacy marketing platforms. And so anyhow, I'm riffing, but I'd be curious to get your guys' take on that, because you're dealing with it every day and you're seeing all these vendors and you're working with Salesforce Marketing Cloud. You're working with, probably Oracle Solutions and Adobe. And we work with them as well. So I think they've got some great products, but they've also got some products that are more difficult. And so I think people are getting stuck, particularly outside North America, by the way. We see this a lot, where they just buy the big vendor and then they never really get implemented and they never achieve what they're trying to achieve. And then we kind of get bolted on, and it's always a delicate integration, if you will, literally and figuratively.
Stephen, I'm going to make this more complicated for you, but I think it will make the answer even more interesting, which is, so there's what is the stack that you need, but also, because this comes up a lot too in our scoping process, is what's the order that you should implement? Like what types of tools should you have in place first?
Yeah.
And should you do them at the same time, one after the other? Like if you have like a recommended sort of order of implementation as well.
Yeah. So Josh, I'll riff off of you and then answer Spencer's question, which is to sort of say, how does Salesforce start to fulfill on that promise? And then where does it fall apart? And then how do you then adapt that type of problem that you run into then redoing the stack? Like how does a legacy event occur, more or less? Essentially, you start with Salesforce or anything like that because you need a way to sort of organize or your contacts or your leads, if you're B2B or if you're just a B2C vendor. You needed some way to sort of store users and to have information about them and to enrich them. And then once you had all of that, you were like, okay, well, now that I know who they are and I could do some very basic analytics on them and I can understand what the revenue I'm generating off them, well, how can I get more money out of them? So can I email them? Can I use a marketing cloud to do that? Can I do any number of sort of marketing activities? Can I sort of enhance that with maybe running an e-commerce website that I send them to off of Salesforce Commerce Cloud, any number of other tools that they have. And all of a sudden you're kind of like, well, if I just keep belting on the next thing, I'll just keep getting the incremental revenue. And then to your point, at some point it falls apart and that incremental revenue promise doesn't become a reality because you're spending significant cost in just actually trying to get the thing to work. Whether it's consultation or it's in the actual labor of your team. So then you kind of come into this point of like, okay, well, I need to now rebuild my stack because I'm not doing it correctly. I mean, rarely ever is a new company starting and they have to go through a complicated like stack sort of buying exercise because the problems are not all the same at the same time, right? As I'm a new company, what I really need to do is communicate with my customers and then I need to know who they are and store them, right? So that's a fairly simple problem. But if you're a more kind of legacy provider, you know how to kind of break out all those different use cases and requirements to different tools. So generally, sort of the first place that one would start is in the actual storage and maintenance of their users. And that might not be a change, right? In a lot of cases, a lot of our customers continue to use the Salesforce.com flagship product because it is good at storing users. That's what they build. That's kind of their mainstay. We typically see a lot of folks kind of migrating into a Snowflake or some other type of environment that they're potentially doing some identity resolution on or some type of other enriched activity. That's usually a good starting point because without having good, clean data, the promise of integrating into another system is just it's a fallacy. You'll never get there, right? You'll just be uploading CSV lists or trying to maintain some legacy architecture that you put in place until you can build the real thing, and then you're not really getting any value out of it. So ideally, you have some type of data pipeline or source system that you can set up a pipeline off of, and then from there, we're typically seeing some type of ETL or a CDP type product that's in there that's actually doing the piping and the plumbing. So more or less, you kind of start with building the foundation, then you put some plumbing in. We're halfway up to a house at this point, and then from there, it's about getting and unlocking the revenue capabilities. Because even if you have a great user data warehouse, and even if you have great piping, if you're not doing anything with those users, you're not really making any money off of them, right? So that's where the OneSignal really comes into play there. Whether that's from a sort of running the entire app marketing piece from in-app and push notifications on top of email, and then having some of the journey orchestration capabilities that you have and setting up that automation, that's where you're going to quickly realize the incremental revenue from all that foundational work that you put down. And then from there, typically we see that sort of analytics, personalization tools, MMPs, these types of things that kind of get added on afterwards because they're just realizing more incremental revenue and then powering more of what you would do with that tool that you already had. So again, that example of bring it back to Mixpanel, like Mixpanel and OneSignal like work really well together. You create cohorts in Mixpanel, you sync them directly into OneSignal, and then you have a more robust way of creating audiences. So you don't necessarily have to generate the same cohort definitions with inside OneSignal. You can just create it, Mixpanel, and sync it through. So I think that's like kind of how that incremental revenue then gets realized is you have another tool you can plug in. Plus you get all the additional capabilities and analytical function that Mixpanel has to offer on top of what you would do through OneSignal. So there's this almost like kind of compounding revenue realization that happens when you have more of these tools kind of that A, talk to each other, and then B, also integrate well with each other. And then the sort of kind of final point of how you would progress and sort of round out that tech stack is then to sort of understand like what other use cases can I not solve for today that I need to solve for with people or sort of homegrown systems. And then this is sort of ultimately where that build versus buy discussion ends and you're doing more of the build. And that would be probably more feature-based things. That would be your own data science models that you're using to power things that are unique to your business, or it could be some type of like billing or margin optimization components that you might have that maybe is a little bit separate from like the actual couponing or any other type of functionality that you would have.
I have a quick question to follow up on that, Stephen. Do you see a shift happening from the legacy world of CRM, where I have to have a CRM, that's sort of the foundational component you talked about, the plumbing, if you will, to I think CDP was sort of this migration for B2C companies where I can store all my customer data.
Yeah.
To actually that happening now more in the customer engagement side, and people are not making the CRM investment because CRMs are really built more B2B. Like if you go out there, the relationship of account, parent child, they're not meant for this real time speed and take more action, but I'm not going to go super deep, right? I'm not going to have Steven as one user of, Sweet Green customer profile. Right. And I'm not going to have all these phone numbers against you and all of these contracts because it's not B2B relationship. It's a B2C relationship. So are you seeing a shift of, if I'm a B2C business, does it still make sense for me to do a legacy CRM for my users? Or am I know some of the companies in the OneSignal broader competitive space are very much pitching, don't get a CRM, just use us. Yeah. We are your CRM for B2C. And we're seeing that with more of our customers with our user model where people are just like, I'm just going to have all the data here and I'll pour all the information into a snowflake. I'm curious because you guys see a wide variance here. Is that a trend that's consistent, or is that something I'm just seeing it here or there? It's not as consistent.
It definitely is a trend, right? And it has been fairly consistent. And I think a lot of that is from, the segments and particles of the world kind of being early on in that space and sort of pushing or having an identity resolution product, which is kind of the main value that a CRM adds, more or less, at least on the B2C side. So I think that's been happening for a while. And I think, some of your kind of all-in-one marketing automation plus CRM tools don't really deliver on the promises much there that they're seeking because of the format that the data has to be in order for it to work. And I think that like lack of flexibility makes it a little bit challenging in some cases. I mean, unless you're like hey, I'm an e-commerce shop, like my data is pretty straightforward. Everything I do is digital. But as you start to kind of look into non-digital services or app specific businesses that maybe are the identification is not the primary concern, right? I want people to be able to like go through my app and use it, and I don't necessarily need them to like give me their email address or their phone number or any of these other number of things. Like I want to get out of the way of them making a purchase. So I think the like having a concept of like device ID as somebody's primary identifiers is not very easy to do in a marketing automation system, right? And so I think that's where the CDP really adds a lot of value. I have actually seen even more historically talking about CRMs for B2C. I've seen people use things like Zendesk to be that type of function and to use their like customer care tool to sort of serve that kind of broader thing where you're still logging all of the activity on that user, if you would, in sort of like a Salesforce kind of structure, but again, specifically on like known customers. But it doesn't quite work for that sort of anonymous, like non-information user. So I'd say it's definitely a trend. I think it's the impetus there is more on the we'll call it like the enrichment capability that they're getting out of the CRM, quote unquote CRM that they're now moving into. So being able to do things like sort of calculate an LTV, to looking at frequency or category viability or anything that's a little bit more useful from a marketing standpoint, I think is more the impetus. But just being able to like raw store users, like, I mean, you could just use any type of data warehouse to do that. I think the CRM just really needs to add value somewhere. Otherwise, it's just not going to, or CRM function, if you will, needs to add value somewhere. Otherwise, it's not going to, it's just not, again, it's going to not fulfill the promise that it should be doing.
Makes sense.
Where do you see MarTech going over the next 5 years? I'm going to ask that with a little bit of a loaded question. Obviously, there's a lot of, or a loaded prompt in that there's a lot of stuff going on with AI. I'd be interested to know how you see that, kind of panning out or not. Is it a craze or is there like a real use case there? And beyond AI, like just where do you see things going?
I can start on the AI stuff. I think we spent a lot of time with it. I personally have been using it from the day it got released, the ChatGPT got released, and I've been early on the beta and BARD stuff, and we've been using some tools around here. I'm a big believer. I don't think it replaces humans, but it accentuates and kind of up levels what we're able to do. OneSignal specifically, we're taking a much longer term view that the important things that actually move the needle are predictive around behaviors, categorization, things of nature that are going to add value, more broadly speaking. And we're not rushing to throw in like, iteration on headline or iteration on content, because what we find is that most people we talk to, they're, especially larger companies, they already have relationships with a Jasper or Writer.ai or Grammarly, and they're already doing this stuff on the fly. So adding it to our product, it saves maybe 2 seconds or 3 seconds, but it's not really something that people are clamoring for. So I think that's incredibly important. And I do think it's going to have fundamental change in the marketing areas. And particularly as you get into more content, image generation, that kind of stuff is a little bit more, takes more time and effort. I mean, I can now create images for decks or presentations in 20, 30 seconds that are fantastic, that before I'd have to go get in a queue with our design team, it would take me a week and take them a few hours. So I think for things like that, it's been found really, really fantastic.
I think it's not quite, I'm not sure if it's 5 years out, but potentially it is, or within 5 years. But I think would be really interesting to see is for AI to actually build a lot of the kind of labor that goes into putting a journey together. So essentially I can kind of put in the recipe of what I'm looking to do, like not just from a templating standpoint, say, I want to target, as an example, I want to target everybody who browses my app within the last 24 hours. And I want to set up an automation that based on the number of activities that they did within the app, if they did more than 30 or less than 20 or whatever you think is the most optimized AI tool, I want you to build a journey around that and a set of messages on what we would send to get them to come back. And I think that could be interesting to sort of, right now we do that, but we do that through humans, essentially kind of analyzing the data, going and recreating all the content. Even if we can shortcut some of that content, we still have to go and create it. We still have to implement it and activate it. For an AI tool to be able to kind of work out the pattern of what that is. And then for me as the human, sort of QC it, but then also to sort of validate, can I beat the AI in this case? Like, is it worth my effort to continue focusing on this specific problem, or do I have the AI run infinite number of variations and continue to kind of optimize against its own sort of foundation? So I'm sort of moving myself out of being the maybe the day-to-day operator of the tool and using AI more as the operator, whereas I'm more the strategic brain that's kind of dictating where it should spend its time. I think that would be interesting. I think we're a little bit further off from that just because there's just a lot more sort of understanding that the AI has to do, and the types of things that we're doing are not necessarily readily available on Google search. There is a lot of kind of human input. So there's a lot of training of the AI that would need to happen before it can be able to interpret at the sophisticated level that we're trying to get it to be at, and to really think through of like, well, if you're doing like these 7 behaviors in the app, then you should probably get this message because that's going to be the most enticing thing that's going to get you to come back after you abandon. So I do think there's a strong possibility there for sure.
This podcast was completely generated by AI. All of a sudden I'm going to start. Have you seen the thing where they just start like there's like too many fingers? Yeah. Okay, guys, I did it again. I got to admit that I spaced out for the last 30 seconds and I went into DALL-E, which is like the other OpenAI thing.
Oh, no.
Basically, I typed in a hippo with the OneSignal logo on its forehead, who is the host of a podcast. Got about halfway there, but it became a little bit nightmare fuel-y, and I'm going to show this on my screen real quick. For those of you who are just listening and not watching, I'll do my best to just describe it. I'll show you 2 different ones here. There we go. So I just want to, it says hip zop histopo, which I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I don't see the OneSignal logo or anything that even says OneSignal anywhere on here. So that was a fail. Also, just look at the eyes on this hippo. I don't know what's going on there. And then here's the other one. Also not OneSignal. Hispopiat gurniplotus. Like, what is that? Again, something's wrong, like really, really wrong with the eyes. So I tried, maybe, I got to say, like, we have 2 of our creative team on this call. You're safe. You're safe.
We definitely have some time for sure before it
gets to bring it
good.
back home 5 years from now. Probably we'll have a lot more accuracy here. It's exciting. But as of today, you get hipzop, histopo, and hinpoip ipo, tistantipup. Whatever, however you say, I can't even pronounce. It literally starts going into weird characters. So we got some time to work that one out. Closing remarks, Stephen and Josh, you want to give us like 10-second blurbs, 15-second blurbs to leave us off with here?
Yeah, we didn't get into a lot of detail around some of this stuff. I would encourage people, one, if you don't have the wherewithal, like find a good partner who can guide you in this process, like a Ragnarok as an example. I also would encourage people to try. I think all modern software should have easy kind of POC trials to really get a feel for, does it work? Does it not work? Get inside there. Like, it should be simplistic and straightforward and solve the basic things you need to get solved for. I think too often people get caught up in the whiz of a demo and just kind of make long-term decisions without actually really knowing whether it's going to work for them. So.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think it's really important that you are very prescriptive about what you are trying to do with each tool, and that you have defined what you would consider, not what the salesperson, not what your CSM tells you is success, but what you consider success of that tool, and being very clear and communicating that with your provider. So that way everybody can mutually work towards making sure that outcome is successful.
All right. Well, that's all we have for today, and because we're over time, but it's okay. So call to action. Thank each other. Okay.
No, Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you. Thanks. It's like a church. Everybody like gets up and it's nice to see you, and pat on the back. Okay, next in the bullet point list, subscribe to podcast / follow us on social. Do both of those things, please. And by us, I mean both OneSignal and Ragnarok.
Yeah.
And finally, bullet point number 3, don't forget to check out OneSignal's podcast on your preferred platform where we talked about X. I don't know what X is, but
I think it's a cross.
I assume it's everything we talked about here.
I hope we mark this episode as comedy. Because there's some dark comedy there at one point. This is like there's some drama.
Welcome to the Ragnarokast.
Yeah.
Stephen, Spencer, I really appreciate being on here, and I appreciate you joining our podcast as well. As was mentioned, this will be a collab, which will be shared on both channels. And yeah, you should definitely follow the podcast, listen to them. You're going to get a lot more comedy from this one than any other I've ever done. But I realized that I need to infuse a little bit more humor and laughter to make it worthwhile. So on that note, thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.